All right, welcome back to Wrestling Retold and Relived with Richie Mars. I, of course, am your humble, gracious host, Richie Mars. Thank you for clicking on this episode here today. Thank you for listening wherever you're listening, Spotify or Apple Podcasts. It's a glorious week in the wrestling world. We're kind of recovering from the WrestleMania hangover still. I know it's still been about a month plus, but we got over that, the draft, etc. So why don't we go for some topics that I don't feel like are touched on enough now that we're really focused on the AEW stuff, the WWE stuff that's going on. Let's go back into our DeLorean. Let's gun it to 88 and let's go back to 2013. And we're going to go back to one of the most impactful storylines around that time. We're going to go Daniel Bryan versus Bray Wyatt and the Wyatt family. But before we do, I couldn't do this alone. I couldn't tackle this alone. I could barely do an episode by myself. So I had to phone a friend. I had to call one of the great premier content creators on TikTok,
Wow.
Wrestling and Coffee. Thank you for joining me here today.
Hey, thanks for having me. This is awesome. I'm excited.
Yeah, of course, man. It's like I wanted you to get on the show for a while, and I asked what topic you want to pick up on, and this was the one that you pitched. So, what made you decide on the Daniel Bryan versus Bray Wyatt feud?
So we all remember them in the cage. It was the Usos match and against Bray Wyatt and Daniel Bryan, and the Usos won.
Mhm.
They went over the cage, and the Harper and Rowan were stuck on the outside and could not get in, and that's when Bryan took his the advantage of turning on Bray Wyatt and just controlling the crowd. That whole thing, like just that whole place going insane, like the when it happened. Like I think it was on the documentary or something popped up with Bray Wyatt recently, and I was like, oh man, I remember that. And thinking back on that whole feud, I was like, I don't think that feud got the love it did because of the time it took place in.
Mm.
And look, I think now looking back on it, we can appreciate that feud. You know,
All right, well, let's go back to that feud, but we'll even go back a little bit further because we're still kind of in the baby boom in 2013 of the Yes movement. You know, the Shield was running strong, and Team Hell No was going through just their trials and tribulations with the Shield. And it really did start in a WWE.com exclusive where they told Team Hell No kind of do whatever you want. Where the premise was, since the Shield were running roughshod, like they would say, it's like, oh man, someone should really step up to the Shield when it's Team Hell No that we're trying to take down the Shield. So that them doing that
right?
would just be admitting it's like, oh wow, we can't do it. I hope somebody else comes along and do it. And this promo kind of turned into Daniel Bryan saying he wasn't the weak link of the team, you know. And the Daniel Bryan character at this time was very riddled in insecurity, pretty much, because if we remember his first singles run as the vegan world heavyweight champion, it was
Yeah.
about being cowardly, dastardly, everything like that. And then the whole team run with Kane happened. And then this kind of transition to Daniel Bryan's character to prove that he is a single star, with even people like Randy Orton calling him out. What did you think about this transition from Daniel Bryan, the Team Hell No Daniel Bryan, to the Yes Movement Daniel Bryan?
I feel like if we were finally getting the Daniel Bryan that's always been there, but like he just they weren't like they were all. I always feel like they always held him back. I mean, look at even when he lost to Sheamus and like what was it, like 5 seconds or whatever
18.
at WrestleMania 18, yeah, whatever it was. That took place. Like I'm so glad I didn't go to that Mania because like I would have been so upset about that. It was in Miami, by the way, but yeah, like I feel like this is when they find they're like we're going to finally stop putting the brakes on him, but still make it look like we are. But we're finally going to stop like holding him back and like let's see what this guy can do. I feel like that's what really like what was happening behind the scenes. And I mean, and look what happened from it. Like it was the right decision.
Yeah, and I remember reading a Bleacher Report article at that time saying Daniel Bryan needs to lose in 3 seconds or something like that. So when it actually happened, I was like, "Oh wow, this is like the Bleacher Report article." So I was more stunned that this
Right.
article was right than Daniel Bryan losing in
Right.
18 seconds. And
Right.
yeah, that moment really did kickstart Daniel Bryan into high gear because even he admits in his autobiography that he was really trying to push like getting yes t-shirts done, and WWE were giving kind of like the ho and the hum about making the yes t-shirts, and then the night after WrestleMania
Right.
happened, where everyone's doing the yes chant, and then he did the promo after the crowd saying, "Well, it looks like you convinced them to get me a new t-shirt,"
All
So
right.
it's like all that was going on from there, and
Yeah, that was the start of the Yes movement.
yeah,
I free like I didn't even think about that. Yeah, that's crazy.
yeah, and
Wow,
now
I
it's
completely missed that.
and now we're like a year later, and with Daniel Bryan, I don't even want to say they were cooling him off with the team with Kane because it helped them both tremendously. Because before then,
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Daniel Bryan wasn't really known as like a character based wrestler, and Kane, he wasn't really doing much of note or interest for the grand scheme of things of a storyline because he did like the John Cena like embrace the hate kind of deal, and he had like I call it the fruit roll up mask that he had,
Yeah.
and that was like
Yeah.
going like because everyone's like, "Oh, Kane, we want the mask Kane back," and then he put the mask on, and everyone's like, "No, we don't want that. We don't want that
Yeah,
mask."
no, not that
Yeah,
one.
and everything just kind of clicked with both of them as a team, and now with Daniel Bryan with this new paranoid gimmick of being the weak link of the Shield and just going into this kind of downward spiral really did set the tone of this underdog character whether WWE wanted it or not. it he already
Right.
had that fan base support, and now with the storyline where he's the center of attention, that's what's putting him to the next level. And we're gonna fast forward into Daniel Bryan being chosen as John Cena's opponent for SummerSlam. A little behind the scenes
Yeah.
note: Daniel Bryan noted that John Cena went to Vince McMahon and they were talking about opponents for Money in the Bank, and John Cena suggested Daniel Bryan, and Vince said, "Why Daniel Bryan?" And John Cena said, "It's the biggest match we could do at this point," because Vince asked him, "What is the biggest match we could do?" So Vince
Right.
decided to push it back to SummerSlam. So that's when
Okay.
that match decided to take place, and I believe that's when John Cena had a partially torn tricep.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah,
Yeah, he
which
did.
is really impressive at that time. That
Yeah.
John Cena still was in that situation, big time main event with a partially torn injury, even though his opponent was smaller than him, and actually keeping up with his opponent as well. So,
Yeah.
what did you think about John Cena versus Daniel Bryan at SummerSlam 2013? And do you think this was the beginning of the WWE audience and the wrestling audience at large turning uh, turning more into a groundswell of support for not only Daniel Bryan but John Cena as the wrestler?
Um well, we also have to remember too like Triple H was the referee in that
Mm-hmm.
match. Because originally Brad Maddox, like where it came from, like Brad Maddox was going to do it
Mm-hmm.
after he counted Bryan out quickly when he was facing Wade Barrett, and then this is when Triple H came out and was like, "Hey, like, no, you're not going to be the referee. I'm going to be the referee." Basically, looking like he's going to be the good guy and be making sure that it's going to be fair and down the line for Bryan as well. And I mean, honestly, like I feel like it's weird to me that John Cena for so long, and I guess I kind of get it because he was like the guy forever, but like people forget like how good he is, and I think it's the same with Randy Orton. I feel like because there was so much of them like Randy Orton and John Cena facing each other,
Mm-hmm.
and it just became like old hat. Nobody cared, and there was no like innovation in the matches. There was anything like you're like, oh god, what a great match. But like I feel like the John Cena and Randy are two guys that like if they face somebody like a Daniel Bryan, anybody like that's uh more of a wrestler than a superstar, and the like. I feel like obviously that's what Bryan is. Like, I feel like he's more of a wrestler than it's like what a WWE superstar is. And that's when those people realize like, oh God, John Cena is actually really good at this. It's like, yeah, he just doesn't. They wrestle a certain way as superstars, so they have a longer career. Like, we understand that the five moves of doom, all that jazz. But and I think that and like I think John Cena has great chemistry with pretty much everyone that he ever wrestles too. Like, I think he just is just he's a smart guy. We all know he's a smart guy. But anyway, so like I just thought, I'm trying to like I should have rewatched that match before this. But like I just, we know Bryan wins, and then this is when the authority starts like taking place, right? Yeah. So like this is when Orton comes out with the money in the bank, cashes it in, goes to cash it in. Triple H hits Bryan with the pedigree, and Orton wins the WWE Championship at that point. So, and I don't know if this was something they were just doing to like wait till Mania to see what happens, or like how do you feel about that whole thing going like that went down? Do you think they were just trying to not make Bryan the guy, or make it look like they weren't, to the fans, trying to pull the wool over eyes?
I think it's a mix of we have this storyline idea at that point. Triple H, who was in storyline power at that point, wasn't a heel since 2006, I believe. So it's been a while.
Yeah,
So it
yeah,
was a necessary change. And Orton, he
yeah,
wasn't really doing much as a babyface at that point, too. And you already kind of
right,
set up that Randy Orton, Daniel Bryan tension before. I believe they had a couple matches, like the Stinger match where Daniel Bryan gets the Stinger and the match was called
yeah,
off.
yeah.
And the street fight that they had, they also had a tag team title match against the Shield at Payback,
That's
I
yeah,
believe. So they were building up something with Randy and Daniel Bryan. And what was kind of happening at this point, I believe, and I was all for like an authority kind of angle with a faction because it was a while since we've seen
right,
one of that. But the problem with the authority
right,
angle was they didn't get their comeuppance really that necessarily. I believe the first
yeah,
time like Triple H like was like down was when Big Show hit him with a KO punch, and that wasn't until probably the fall, like late fall of that angle,
yeah, yeah,
and that's when they fired Big Show for the angle. But in terms of the Randy Orton Daniel Bryan main event stuff, I think it was to kind of like one see what happens with like pay per view buys and stuff like that with Daniel Bryan. And from what I read in Bryan's book, they didn't do exceedingly well comparatively to
okay,
other pay per view buys. And another thing is, since Batista was getting his deal done with WWE, he
yeah,
was always going to be in that WrestleMania 30 picture. I think
yeah,
because they actually did tease in his DVD that he did before he left that his goal was to be the undisputed champion of the both world and WWE champion.
right,
So I think
right,
they wanted it to build Randy up as this hateable heel and have Batista be the conquering hero. What they didn't expect
right,
was they already kind of planned out this story with Daniel Bryan, whether it was intentional or not, and it
right,
was almost by accident, by mistake, because I don't think they realized the groundswell of support that he had, and I think it really did change like the wrestling how they see stars and how they build stars, because even if you could go headstrong saying no, we have to go this way, this is our plan, but if you don't have necessarily enough time to kind of pivot, then
right,
it's all going to be for naught. As we saw this year at WrestleMania, what happened when they
yeah,
pivoted towards the Cody Roman match instead of the planned Rock Roman match.
right,
So and that storyline idea of the Daniel Bryan Randy Orton series, I think could have worked a little bit. The thing is, like all the finishes to their pay per view matches after the SummerSlam match were very strange. In Night of Champions, it was the quick count that gave Bryan the win, but then they vacated the championship, or as they said in on TV, it's been held in abeyance. So that's a new one. It's
Right.
not vacant who's holding the championship; it's abeyance who's holding it.
Right.
And then you had Battleground, I believe, for the vacant championship, and then you had Big Show knock both of them out at the end of pay per view.
Yeah.
And this was before the network too. So if you bought the pay per view, the finish was your top two stars being knocked out by Big Show, who, all due respect, he came back at that year's SummerSlam. He wasn't really positioned as that main event level attraction. And then
No.
it finally happened at Hell in a Cell when Shawn Michaels cost Daniel Bryan the WWE Championship. And Daniel Bryan was actually saying he's like kind of intrigued. He's like, all right, Shawn must have like agreed to come back for a match or something like that. And
Right.
Shawn's like, no, I'm retired. He's like, I'm gonna stay retired forever, and he did stay retired forever. You can't tell me anything different. Nothing happened in 2018 where he came back. He stayed retired forever. But Shawn actually had to pitch the segment where Daniel Bryan put him in the LaBelle lock or the yes lock because
Right.
he didn't want to steal like Daniel Bryan's momentum. But after that, we then transitioned into the Daniel Bryan Wyatt family program. And we're going to rewind a
Yeah.
tad bit to the Wyatt family and how they debuted on Raw, attacking Kane. Since Daniel Bryan and Kane kind of split up, Kane had nothing to do. So you get the Face of Fear involved with Bray Wyatt and his Wyatt family with Luke Harper and Eric Rowan. And they competed in the first ever, I believe, Ring of Fire match. Now, when
Oh
you
god. Yeah. Yeah, I remember
when you
that.
hear like silly gimmick matches like this, like the Ring of Fire, Mountain Dew Pitch Black match, really out
Right.
there gimmicks. What is your first initial thought as a fan, and then thinking of it as from an outsider looking in? Would that attract you to see a match like this?
Well, anytime anything's sponsored, like the Mountain Dew Pitch Black, it just like that's, and I get why they do it, but it's to me, it's like a turnoff. Like, it's like it's almost like if you had, I don't even, like a Levi's like jeans match or something, like, and they wrestle in jeans. It's just like, it doesn't make it. It's just like, I don't care, and then it's, when you have something like, okay, so like the whole ring has, the fire around it, and I remember them doing that, but it was just like, does it add anything to me as a fan watching this? Do I think anybody's going to catch on? Like, is anything going to happen because it's a ring of fire instead of, like, a lumberjack match where all the guys are outside pushing them back in? Like, they can't, and it just, I don't, it doesn't, like, I feel like a lumberjack match would have been more interesting, just because, again, they're not going to get burned. The fire's not going to do anything to them. It might look cool,
Mm-hmm.
but after, a couple minutes, you just don't care, like, you're like, it's just not, there's no like real danger in it. And, I just, and it's like, I don't like, don't get me wrong. Like, I love gimmick stuff, but again, it's just after a certain amount of time you're watching it, and then like you're saying, coming in as someone that doesn't know what wrestling is. There was so many, like, I used to be a manager of a comic book shop, like, before, pre-COVID, and I would have WWE on, like, I'd have Raw or SmackDown, or and when the network was still going, I would play some of the old WrestleManias and just have wrestling on, like, in the background while the store is open, and people would watch it sometimes and be like, "What the fuck is going?" They're like, "What is going on right now?" And I feel like that would be like, why is it, why is there fire around the ring? And they're like, well, this guy, Kane, he's a guy that can, like, control fire, sort of. And then, like, it just does, to me, it just doesn't work,
Yeah.
and I feel like, but again, like, what do you do? Like, what do you do? Not try something new
Mm-hmm.
at the same time? Like, you can't, like, that's why I don't, like, if they kept doing it, I'd be like, okay, guys, stop. But, like, they did it, What, like that one time
Yeah,
it was like, I'm trying to
it was
remember.
one time, and the Ring of Fire match. I always was tickled by the idea because the Ring of Fire. It's like, all right, the ring's surrounded by fire. All right, what else? Do you have to catch your opponent in fire? No. Okay, so how does it end in the ring? Okay, so what's the fire for? To keep people
Right.
out. Okay, what was the finish? They put a fireproof blanket over the one of the areas to interfere.
Oh yeah, that's
And then it's like, okay, so the fire didn't really do anything. It did not. All
right.
right, there we go. Moving on. You just gotta have like a little fun with it because it's like I'm not like for
Right.
me, if like a gimmick match is like bad or anything like that, the Mountain Dew Pitch Black match, I could still like have fun like watching it,
Right.
because it it does encapsulate like wrestling, like the goofy part, and sometimes the goofy parts don't really
Right.
work. But as an introduction to the Bray
Right.
Wyatt character, because I believe this was his first official match, do you think it did its
Right.
job portraying the Wyatt family as these scary trio, or do you think it came off a little bit more goofy than intended?
Uh, I feel like maybe it came off more goofy. Like, I remember when they like watching them in NXT and just being so completely like, I mean, just watching Bray. The first time you see Bray, it's just, yeah, it was like magic. Like, you're watching this guy and you're like, who is this? It's like you're finding this guy who like clicked into something that you've never really seen before, and it's like, I don't even know. It's like, is he a cult member, a cult leader? Like, what is this dude? And he and but again, like bringing them on to into like, it was weird because they always dabbled into like, were they supernatural or not at the same time during that period too.
Right.
And I just feel like it. I don't think it hurt them per se, but it definitely just, you know, because obviously they were like, maybe if he didn't have two big dominant people like Harper and Rowan with him, it would they'd be might have come off differently. Like, maybe a little if he was by himself, maybe. But I don't think it hurt him. But again, like, at the end of the day, like, who did that match really help? Nobody. I don't think.
Right. And especially at a time because when they re-debuted on Raw, or Bray Wyatt, he was Husky Harris before in NXT. Now he's
Yeah.
Bray Wyatt,
Right.
and then as he's kneeling, arms out with Kane, you hear a portion of the crowd chant Husky Harris. So that's always never really a good sign. Remember when Lord Tenzai came back
Right.
and they were chanting Albert at him, even though
Right.
they were
Right.
trying really hard to get Lord Tenzai over. So
Right.
it was really tough. So Bray Wyatt would have what I would call establishment feuds a little bit after the fact, where it's like they're still
Yeah.
establishing him to the television audience. The thing with Kane. I think he had a short run with Kofi for a little bit, Kofi Kingston.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then we're finally transitioning after the Hell in a Cell pay per view to Daniel Bryan and Bray Wyatt. And this was the first test to see if this feud would make or break Bray Wyatt as a legitimate threat. And I think Bryan was the perfect opponent for him, but I'm not sure if necessarily Bray Wyatt was the perfect opponent for Daniel Bryan at that time, if that makes any sense,
No.
because Bryan
Yeah, that makes sense. 100%.
yeah, because Bryan was still in that WWE Championship loss hangover, and the audience thought, oh, clearly we're going in the direction that they keep screwing Daniel Bryan over. He's going to get that championship
Right.
back. And then when Bray Wyatt comes in, it's that long, like, detour, like you said, with when Cody and Brock had it, except we actually got a reason why Bray Wyatt attacked Daniel Bryan, and Bray Wyatt had like this intrigue with Daniel Bryan about trying to like corrupt him and other things like that. And that enlists Daniel Bryan to find some backup in a former rival and friend, CM Punk. Now, when this
I
team was
remember this.
when this team was happening, I think they called them the Beard and the Best or something.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
what do you think of super teams like this, like a Daniel Bryan and CM Punk, like a Rated RKO? Do you think it kind of enhances tag team wrestling, or do you think it diminishes the tag team division since the tag team division usually in WWE doesn't have as much star power?
So I am a always been a fan of tag team wrestling myself. But I am not I'm not the biggest fan of just putting two guys you don't really. And again, I mean, you did that with Team Hell No, and look, I loved Team Hell No, but like they came out as team. Hell, they weren't just like this is Brian and this is Kane. Like team of Brian, Daniel Bryan and Kane. Like when you don't when you put them together and don't establish them as an actual like tag team and then have them actually do like a tag team run and like that's when I get bothered, especially when like you have like two people teaming up that go against, especially what if it's like the tag team champs
Mm-hmm.
and they win the match against the tag team champs and it's not for the title, it's just like them having a match before like a pay-per-view or something.
Right.
That always bugs me because I'm like, you just make it's like I get what you're trying to do, but you have these guys that work together all the time that are the champions of your division, and they fucking lost to two like guys that are like solo wrestlers. Like it does to me that bugs me more than anything. I will say though, I loved that when they were like what I remember like geeking out so much and loving marking out so much when they teamed up Brian and Punk. Like I was like over the moon for this. Like I remember, and again, like it worked because they were going against the Wyatt family. They weren't really established. They Rowan and Harper as like the tag team, the running as a tag team yet. They were a trio. They were a little faction. So to me, that worked. In that sense. And yeah, I just, God, I remember just that feeling of, I was like, oh my God, Punk and Brian are teaming together and just like how the chemistry they had together was fantastic too.
I always remember this as CM Punk's mutton chop phase or Wolverine phase because he had
Mm-hmm.
like the facial hair where it's just like yeah.
SummerSlam when he went against Brock. It's funny because there's a comic book artist. I follow a bunch of different comic book artists, and like it's always funny when you see people like post something about wrestling that you're like, huh? You watch wrestling? Like somebody you didn't
Yeah.
know was into wrestling at all. And her name's Fiona Staples. She does a lot of work with like DC Comics, and she posted a drawing of like CM Punk like and Brock Lesnar, and she's like, I was like, oh my God, like I didn't know you like watch. I commented on it. She's like, yeah, it was so cool. It was like watching Hulk versus or the Wolverine versus the Hulk, and I was like, that is a spot on, description of especially that match that happened in SummerSlam. That 2013 SummerSlam.
Yeah.
Like even though Punk lost, that was a fantastic match between the both of them. They both were fantastic.
And still didn't win Slammy for match of the year. It wasn't even nominated. So that tells you how legitimate
Yeah,
the
that's
Slammy Awards are.
yeah, that's exactly.
Yeah. So I want to ask you this
I,
question with this Beard and the Best tag team between CM Punk and Daniel Bryan. When they had their match at Survivor Series against Rowan and Harper, do you think that they kind of missed the boat of not making it like a six man or a team kind of match with team like Wyatt versus team Punk and Bryan, and you add maybe one more person to team Punk and Bryan? Or did you think that this tag team match between just the four individuals that I named was enough at the time?
and you said it was Harper and Rowan,
Yeah.
right? Okay. I honestly, yeah, I think it would have worked better if they had a third person, because that way you're getting Bray in the mix and not just having his, without a better lack, his like lackeys, which they definitely weren't. They were like, I don't think that Bray ever made them feel that way either.
Mm-hmm.
Like look that way, but yeah, I feel like I don't know. Like I'm trying to think of who they would have gotten at the time. You know, because they did because before all that stuff, they did have like Kane and him Kane turning on him and having to do the gauntlet match and all that
Yeah.
stuff. So I'm just like I'm trying to think of at that time who they would have had team up with them, but uh, maybe Kofi
Yeah, like
at the time. Like I'm just trying to think what he was
yeah,
doing.
like Kofi,
You know?
Ziggler.
Yeah.
There were. I was gonna say they were pushing Miz, but I think Kofi and Miz actually had a match on the pre-show, and that's when Miz was like turning heel again because
Right.
this was the year of Miz's first babyface run, which didn't work beautifully, but I think he's
No.
kind of making up for it now as a
Yeah. Oh,
babyface.
100%.
So
Yeah.
Punk and Bryan win this tag match, and again they would split up between fighting different factions. So Punk would go this way with the Shield, and then Bryan would still stay
Yeah.
with the Wyatt. And that came TLC, which was a very weird kind of mix with pay per view, but it also established the Authority's power and putting Punk in a handicap match and putting Bryan in a handicap match against all these factions. The weird thing is Punk won his because this is when they were kind
Yeah.
of teasing the dissension with the Shield, and Bryan
Right.
uh, with a valiant effort, lost his to the Wyatt family. And it seemed like, besides that win at Survivor Series, like the weekly television was just Bryan getting demolished by the Wyatt family. Like the promos. I think they did like a nursery rhyme promo when they kidnapped Bryan, and then they like choke slammed him through like a void. And yeah, it just makes me laugh
Yeah.
because it's like you have Bray Wyatt cutting the sinister nursery rhyme promo, which is not supposed to be scary, and then you hear Bryan on the outside just going, "Ah!" and then it just like he's like in the void. It's just, and then I
Right.
just remember seeing him just like I'm like, is Bryan like? Did he disappear? Is he gonna come back next week? And then he came back like nothing happened. I
Right.
was like, oh, all right.
Right.
I thought they would like kidnap him or something like that, but
Right. They threw him into like like you said, the abyss, and like he was just like, "Oh, what happened? I don't
I
know.
don't know.
I woke up and I was home." You
Just
know.
woke up. It was Raw again. So when the Wyatt family was going around this time, do you think adding the realism that they kind of did as more competitors worked well, or do you think they should have added more spooky stuff that we saw in these vignettes? Because after the vignettes aired, we never really saw the Wyatt compound as much. We just kind of saw them as characters on a weekly television. Do you think that kind of hurt their presentation a little bit, or do you think they just kind of altered it to fit the WWE, for lack of a better term, universe at that point?
I'm always for more spooky. Like I'm the Undertaker was my guy when I was a kid. Like he's the one who like I remember him scaring me, being scared of him, but I also like in awe of him, being like this guy is so cool, you know, and just like I've it's funny because like I love all rest like you know all sort like and there is no type of match or whatever that I'm like oh I hate this kind of match you know just well maybe a death match like I'm not the biggest fan of watching those but if they tell a good story like Hangman and Swerve did like I'll be like okay let's watch this is fine but I feel like wrestling you know we all say it's an art and then art can take any form and be told in any way and I really think if they would have leaned into that doing the spookier stuff and like even like have you know Bryan go into the void and then you know the next week he's not at Raw he's at the Wyatt compound and they have him you
Hmm.
know like that whole thing I feel like would have worked better and like them you know almost like Bryan like showing Bryan almost like in a fever dream
Yeah,
almost and like
that'd been
things are
really cool.
happening you know he's like tied up in a chair and like things are going on around him and he's like freaking the fuck out because he's like what's going on
Yeah, like
you know
you
I feel
see,
like that
he
maybe
looks in a mirror. He doesn't have his beard anymore. I
right
like just like weird like outside stuff, like basically the tunnel
right
from like Willy Wonka. Like I think that would be
exactly
good. I
exactly
always felt with the Bray Wyatt character as it went on, Vince, or whoever was controlling WWE at that time, wink wink, always try to be a little bit or always try to be a little bit too cute in his
yeah
presentation by making it
hmm
more silly and goofy and tongue in cheek than it would be
yeah
like compelling television. When did you think
right
that the Bray Wyatt like jumping the shark moment was? at least for this iteration of the character, the Wyatt family, cult leader Bray.
I don't like. I always feel like they got so close to him being like it. Just like I feel like I'm trying to remember because this is so long ago.
Yeah.
It's like 10 years ago. God, yeah. It's just like when you think about. It's funny because when I said I don't know if I said it earlier, just talking about this topic, like bringing it up. I was like, oh my God, this was happened in 2013. Good Lord. I remember I remember, so many, like, just not everything from there, obviously, but I feel like Bray Wyatt never worked in this cult leader thing. Cause like you were saying, they always had like the vignettes they were kind of spooky and doing like the run and all these things, follow the buzzards, like all these different things that are just, these one number one, like perfect things to put on shirts. Like
Mhm.
he just that man, anything he said you could put it on a shirt and people would buy it. But
So
I feel like
speaking of the shirt, I'm sorry to cut you off, but
no, go
A
ahead.
Bray Wyatt shirt that they had listed on WWE.com during this time. So this is when WWE was trying to be a part of pop culture a little bit, and the
Yeah.
shirt was. Do you remember the song "Watch Me Whip, Watch Me Way Way"? No, nay nay.
Uh huh.
So there
Yeah.
was a shirt that says "Watch me whip, watch me bray bray," or just "Watch me bray
Oh
bray,"
Jesus.
and
Oh
it's
God.
just Bray Wyatt. It's just like the the font was just the Bray Wyatt font, and then it's just a picture of Bray at the bottom of the shirt. It's not even like a big picture of Bray. It's like this teeny little picture of Bray next to all the like this lettering, and I'm just like, this makes no sense whatsoever.
No. And not fitting, like befitting of the character
Yeah.
whatsoever. Like, yeah, there was a time where I feel like, I mean, let's just be real. Like most wrestling shirts, I think, and are terrible. Like
Yeah.
there's so many like I'm like I would buy a shirt from this person, but every design they have is just god awful.
Yeah.
It's like something I don't want to wear.
Like
You
like
know?
some of it would be like the shirt, like the front would be fine. Like I'm like, okay, I could wear the front,
Yeah,
but then it's like you look at the back, it's like this big giant like design that I'm just like, I can't wear. I can't wear that in the back. Or
yeah,
it's like some saying that doesn't really make any sense. So it's like if somebody stops
right,
you, it's like, oh, what does that mean? Then you have to spend like 5 minutes explaining like the lore and stuff, and then you're like,
right. And then
exhausted.
their brain shuts off halfway through, and they're thinking, "Why did I ask this
Yeah,
person about
yeah.
their shirt?"
Then they're like, oh yeah, cool. Then you're like,
I guess it's not cool.
it's like that whole Seth Rollins is not cool thing. You know, the photo he uploaded where he's like in
Right,
he's like in the swim cap with the little
right.
like the little floaties and
But-
stuff. But with the with Bray Wyatt, the things that jumped the shark to me a little bit were I think a year after like the whole Bryan feud. Like there were
right.
vignettes where he was like releasing Harper and Rowan into the wild or something like that, like releasing them from
Okay.
the faction, so Bray wasn't a part of a faction anymore, which was weird.
Right.
Which was weird, and then they
Yeah.
got back together later on the next year. So I'm like, okay,
And yeah, is that when they brought in Braun too? I'm trying to
Ye-
remember the
yeah,
timeline.
it was like kind of in that time like frame. It's like I think like Harper got hurt, or, like that's when the whole Luke Harper Intercontinental Championship run happened when he was released
Yeah.
from the Wyatt
Yeah.
family, and then like Rowan was there, and he was like a veneer or something like that, and he was like super intelligent and smart. He was like doing the Rubik's cube
Oh yeah.
thing.
Oh yeah.
And
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
was like I was like, oh, all right. And then they came back, and this and the second thing that jumped the shark with Bray Wyatt was do you remember like the Demon versus the Sister Abigail match that never happened?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that was that where it's like like Bray's like, oh, I have an alter ego. I'm like, all right. And then the whole Sister Abigail thing, and it's just like Bray like in like a wedding veil. I'm like, I thought Sister
Yeah.
Abigail was just like a fictional I didn't think it was an actual like a being. And then it's just like Bray
Right.
Wyatt in like a dress. I was like, oh, okay, that's weird. And then that was the debut of the Pumpkin Demon, where Finn's demon was just like orange for whatever reason.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And then I'd be like, all right, here we go. But but getting back to the
God.
Dan-
Creative back then. Jesus Christ. Okay.
back to the Daniel Bryan, Bray Wyatt stuff. It culminates in 2013 at the end of the year when Bryan runs the gauntlet against the Wyatt family, and he beats Harper, beats Rowan, and then he was about to beat Bray, but then the Wyatt family interfered, and then Bray
Yeah.
said, "It's like this could all end today if you just like join me." And Bryan's like, "Oh, you were right. You were always right." And then Bryan was then inducted into the Wyatt family. And I remember they had Brie Bella tweet that to tweet out to the audience that, oh, Bryan's okay, like he's just needs some time to himself, because a lot of people were legitimately concerned with Bryan being abducted by the Wyatt family and turning against the Wyatt family and
Right.
turning heel at arguably his highest peak of popularity. What were your thoughts about Daniel Bryan joining the Wyatt family?
I remember at the time being like, well, not just that. Like, I remember them just, it felt like they dragged the story out
Mm-hmm.
because they didn't really know what else to do. Um, and again, like, we have to remember, like you were saying, this is at like peak Yes movement. This is like, next year's WrestleMania 30. Like, WrestleMania 30 is like that following April. Like, this is right before all of that. And I really feel like this was, I don't know if they were trying to cool the fans off on Bryan, turn on Bryan, and like, see if that would work at all. But I just remember at the time feeling like it was just not a good move at all for Bryan to join them. And then at some point, but I remember that happening and then seeing them together and just thinking, he's going to turn on them at some point, right? Like, we're going to get this. Like, this is why he's joining them, because he's going to tear them apart from the inside out. Like, this is what he's doing. And I just remember him coming out in those fucking the coveralls too. I think it was they were sleeveless, and it was just being like, I just remember it just felt forced almost with him putting him in there. If that makes
It,
sense.
it
What did you feel about it?
it does make sense for one. For me, I'd always appreciate the sleeveless garb myself, so I can't really judge it that hard.
Mm,
But I did like they were trying something a little different in that,
right,
because sometimes, like, for example, when Randy Orton joined the Wyatt family, what was different about him? He just kind of like put his hood up. Ooh.
right,
At least it looked
yeah,
like Brian was kind of like going all in on this Wyatt
right,
family like character, and he said in his book that the plan at the time was for Wyatt to face Cena at WrestleMania. So even like as far as then, so he would still be a part of a major story. So it could be like John Cena trying
right,
to like snap Brian out of it or something, and then maybe you could have Brie or Nikki in there or something like that if they wanted to go in that direction. Like there were a lot of possibilities in that story to add Brian to. The thing is, I think people were expecting and anticipating Brian's eventual rise to the championship again. And
right,
I feel like that because we were deviating so far off that path, that I think was a point in time where people are like, oh, he's not going to WrestleMania, because December, that's when you kind of see like who are these contenders for the Rumble, kind of. And
yeah,
since
yeah,
Bryan and Bray, and since Bray was still kind of new, they wouldn't really put Bray in the Rumble this soon because of this story with Bryan. With Bryan, if he's tied up with Bray, then it's like, oh, how is he going to get to WrestleMania? Because there was still only one championship at this point.
right,
So I think this was a moment where, even though I thought it was cool, it was like, okay, not only are we delaying Brian's rise, now everything is kind of going to be in like a stopgap from here on out. So it's like, because we already know, like you said, like the conclusion, like everybody I think had in their mind was Brian's going to try to tear them from within. And the thing is, how long is that going to be? If it's not anytime soon, if it's before the Rumble, we could accept it. If it's after the Rumble, then it's like it's a slim chance that he's going to get his moment at WrestleMania. And I think
Right.
that's what most people were thinking.
Yeah.
But
God, I'm just thinking of like if TikTok was around then, like what people would be.
oh my gosh.
what, like how many people would just be going like
Like,
bananas and being really just upset.
like the whole like if we could compare it to the "We Want Cody" thing,
Yeah.
like the "We Want Cody" thing was so quick. Like it was only a weekend. Like it was only like
Yeah.
it was like from that Friday to the press conference on Thursday. So it was a
Right.
relatively short amount of time with the whole Daniel
Yeah.
Bryan movement from like since like SummerSlam all the way to like this point in time being the end of the year. Oh my gosh, I wouldn't want I wouldn't want to be there right there. And it's just like I think wars would be started, children would be like in the bunker, just being like, well, don't go outside after 7 p.m. The Daniel Bryan fans are coming. They're
Yeah.
gonna be in a angry mob, and
They're yelling. Yeah. They'll be yelling yes on the way here, so you'll know to go for cover.
yeah, and I think if Daniel Bryan wasn't a 5'9", 195 pound superstar who's in this underdog story,
Right.
if he was like say like 6'5", I think people would accept it a little bit more. But because he was like so
Right.
likable, like his
Yeah.
personality was just like so like attractive to like the common wrestling fan because
Yeah.
with Daniel Bryan, he was other than Rey Mysterio, and Rey Mysterio went all over the globe to secure his name. Same thing with Eddie. Bryan was the first, I guess, Ring of Honor independent guy, other than Punk, that was considered more of an underdog. But when they put Punk in an underdog situation, he wasn't really the underdog. He was almost kind of like
No.
1A, 1B to like whoever he was facing. Daniel Bryan, it's
Right.
like he was a guy that WWE didn't see as a top guy, that didn't think could carry the company, but it's like, hey, here's our top guy. And it's like it's almost like when they present Batista, it's like that SpongeBob episode where Squidward comes out and the audience like stops clapping, and then SpongeBob's with the
Yeah.
mop, and then everyone's cheering. It's kind of like that because it's like he's doing it so
Right.
effortlessly, and people like respect Bryan. This was at the time where I think a lot of more people were appreciating that Ring of Honor style, the NXT style that was going on, and Bryan was like 1 foot in the entertainment, 1 foot in the indie, and I think that's why people
Yeah.
were attracted to him. And we're gonna fast forward because this whole like Wyatt family induction only lasts a couple weeks. It only lasts, I think, 2 weeks, and it culminates
I think it was
2 or
3.
3 weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
under a month, I remember, and it culminates in this steel cage match, which is one of the peak moments of Daniel Bryan's career, if not the peak moment. And it is Bray Wyatt and Daniel Bryan against the Usos in a steel cage match. And I remember watching Raw when they advertised like the steel cage match. I'm like, huh, that's odd, because it didn't feel like we got like a build up for a steel cage match where it's just like, bam,
Yeah.
it's
No.
like bam, here's a steel cage match. I'm just like, okay, that's a little weird. That's a little weird. That's a little odd because the Usos at this time, like the Usos now are WrestleMania main eventers. At this point in time,
Yes.
they weren't close to sniffing the main event.
No. They were. A lot of people weren't high on them at the time.
No, they were still doing
Either.
the dance in the beginning. They were still having the face paint,
Yep.
and I always liked the Usos. I thought they were
Uh,
fun. They were good.
I've I've always thought they were tremendous talent. Like from day one, like seeing them that day, like
Day
that
one
day
ish,
one ish.
yeah.
Like that's me watching them. I was like, I'm like, if these guys have like, obviously you can't see it then, but like if they're in this company long enough, I'm like, they're gonna be huge.
I believe I was at their first pay per view match because they would face the Hart
Oh,
Dynasty
nice.
at the pay per view Fatal 4-Way. If anybody remembers Fatal 4-Way, I
Oh
don't.
my
I
god.
don't blame you if you
Yeah.
don't, because this was during the era where WWE named their pay per views after gimmick matches, brother. And
Oh yeah. Jesus.
thank goodness we don't have that except for the Chamber and Money in the Bank. And again, it's less. It's less. It's less. It's less. I will take what I can get.
Hell in a Cell. Yeah, exactly. There's
I
no
take
Ring of Fire pay per view, thank God.
no, not yet. Don't let them hear you.
Yes.
But the ending of the match is the Usos when they escape, and Bray and Bryan are arguing in the ring, and what Bray would be doing for the past couple weeks, and Bryan's initiation was he would receive the Sister Abigail from Bray and then get dragged out.
Yes.
And this time, like Bryan gave himself up, Bray put him in position, and then when Bray decided to turn around, Bryan like gets out of it, and the crowd just goes crazy because they're like,
Buck
"Oh,
wild.
here we go." He's turning on him, and
Yes.
Bray's like, "Do something, do something." He's like, "You're a coward, you're a coward." And then Bryan just attacks Wyatt, sheds off the Wyatt family janitor's gear,
Yes.
and then
The coveralls.
coveralls, and it's like you have this cool like thing where everyone's chatting, yes, with the kicks. Wyatt and Rowan are trying to climb the cage, and then every time they're trying to
Yeah.
climb the cage, Bryan throws Bray to the cage walls, and like everyone's going yes, 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 and then he climbs to the top of the cage, goes yes, 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 and like he keeps doing it. He pauses, and then he keeps doing it until Raw goes off the air. Probably one of the craziest Raw endings in the past 15 years, one of the loudest
Yeah.
ones as well.
Yeah.
And the ironic thing is, Daniel Bryan, Bryan Danielson, does not remember this moment because he was
Nope.
concussed. He was concussed during the
Yep.
match. He remembers Cesaro and Harper uh, looking after him during the match to make sure
Yeah.
he was okay, but he doesn't
Right.
remember anything about the match. And we heard a couple stories of WWE stars who don't remember they like their pivotal moments because of concussions, like the
Yeah.
Miz.
Becky.
Yeah, Becky when she got her face
Yeah.
broken by Nia Jax, she doesn't really remember
Yep.
that. The Miz at WrestleMania
No.
27, he doesn't remember the entire match. So it's
Yeah.
just really ironic that these stars get like their arguably their biggest superstar moment, their biggest trajectory pivot change
Yep.
into superstardom, and they don't remember it. Do you think that
Right.
makes the moment more legendary because even the performer can't describe what it feels, or or do you think it's just one of those like accidents where it's just like it's a weird coincidence that we have all these stars that get concussions or seriously injured for their star making moments?
Yeah. It's honestly it's I don't it's because at that point they're kind of like on autopilot
Right.
because they're doing their job, but they're not they don't remember any of it happening. It's insane. The fact, especially uh, the when it happened to Becky and Bryan, like I remember watching that and Bryan like not only put like what that one point like he slows the yes chant down
Mhm.
and like you were saying like like he slows it and then brings it back up like this roller coaster of like chants and I remember being like, "Holy shit!" And then like seeing all like seeing all like you see all the flashing
Like a
lights and
sea of
the
people too,
like
just like
people.
moving.
Yeah, just it's like somehow like well that too like it's like paparazzis all through like it looks like it's a red carpet thing because you see all these flashes of light going off in the crowd and like I remember watching it when it happened and just like thinking about it to this day still gives me goosebumps. Like it's so crazy. And watching Becky too, like when she got punched in the face. And it's funny actually because I listened to her audiobook and I went back and watched that moment and like because I didn't know she had a concussion. I remember she got punched in the face, but like I don't remember anything like hearing anything about her having a concussion at that time and not remembering anything. And then looking at the video now and they show her face, it's like, oh yeah, she's concussed. Like the eyes are glazed
Yeah.
over. Like you could see it. Like and they get like they weren't close enough to Bryan to see that. Like where, they had like a far enough status because they had to it was in the cage, so they weren't
Yeah.
doing like close shots. And then, he climbed up like you said and did the whole thing. Like it's just crazy to me. I mean, look at like Taker doesn't remember having the match, the end of the
Brock, yeah.
match with Brock, and that was the end of the streak.
Yeah.
So you're like these huge moments that happen, and one of the wrestlers, it wasn't like Taker's defining moment, but like it was a defining moment for his like career in
Yeah.
that sense of like taking the streak is done, and you don't even remember it happening. It's like, is that like the goal? Like, is there something like, again? Nobody should want this to happen to them.
No,
Is like,
absolutely not. Yeah.
should a wrestler be like, I don't want to get concussed, so like hopefully my defining moment will happen on TV for me, and I'll just watch it later.
I remember that whole Daniel Bryan climbing the cage and still doing the yes. I was on
Yeah.
a break in college and
Mm-hmm.
just watching it, and I remember thinking to myself, like, I don't know why. I just thought it was kind of weird because, like, if you see like
Mm-hmm.
Brian's face during the entire thing, he's very
Right.
serious. Not saying that the Daniel Bryan character should be like smiling, happy, and goofy, but he
Right.
wasn't as excited or energetic
Right.
as he
Right.
would
Animated.
be like animated that he left the Wyatt family. And like everything, like there was this, like we were saying, like it was this one moment where it's like he just slows down the yes chant, and then it
Yeah.
seemed like everything was like going in slow motion. And when that finally came out, it's like, oh yeah, he was concussed, in fact. And then it's like, oh, that makes sense. But as you're watching it, you're
Yeah.
kind of like on this like roller coaster ride of being like, something's a little off. I can't put my finger on
Mm-hmm.
it, but it looks like everything's going okay.
Right.
So it's like it's a very trippy thing to see as a fan. And to talk about more trippy moments, that end of the Raw and the reason why Daniel Bryan broke free from the Wyatt family creatively was that he was just too popular. This was
Yeah. Yeah.
this was during the time
Yeah.
period where ESPN, any college game, any NBA game, any game that was
Yeah.
happening during that time, were doing the yes chant. Like you'll have players doing the yes chant, like everybody was doing it. Uh, when the yes chant was becoming more mainstream, do you think this was the first time in a while WWE was becoming mainstream?
I think I wouldn't say it was becoming mainstream again at that point. I think it just they realized, okay, Brian's doing something that's crossing over to these other like something. This is doing something we haven't been able to do in a long time. Like is getting some sort of like any kind of any uh like a catchphrase or something somebody does like that becomes like a phenomenon outside of like WWE. And I don't think it, like I said, it didn't. I don't think it. I think it just got probably more eyes on it, but I think it's WWE in the main is more mainstream now, obviously, than it was then, in the sense of like more people are more aware of it and it's more popular than ever. I don't think it helped them in popularity in that sense. I just think it just made them stop and go, huh, they're the thing that the guy we're trying to stop from becoming a champion, the thing people chant for him, they're doing it in other in other types of sports. Maybe we should take him out of this program with the Wyatts and put him back on track for that WrestleMania moment. Having that shot at the
Yeah.
title.
And this just popped in my head right now. Remember when they tried to give the yes chant to the Big Show?
Yeah, like that's so like why I don't understand why they would try to like why would you take somebody's catchphrase or something and then try to like put it on someone else?
it
It does like that.
it just
Brian
reminds,
got that
yeah.
shit over organically. Like
Yeah, and the thing is, it's just kind of like when you try to, for lack of a better term, pawn it off to somebody else, and then they're doing the same
right,
thing without any deviation, then it's only going to make the fans be reminded of the guy who started it, who's it's the original thing in the first place. It's almost like
exactly.
when WWE or any wrestling organization, when you put new in the front of an old tag team, like the new
Yeah,
Blackjacks, it's the new Outlaws.
right,
It's like, and
right.
it just reminds people, it's like, okay, like these are the new versions. These aren't the ones that we know. Like spin-off like acts that have new in the title don't really work, and this is not including like New Age
No,
Outlaws or New Day, because those were original
right,
things. We're talking about
right,
like already established acts that
right.
get like are basically resting on the laurels of somebody else's success. Like you got the fake Razor, fake Diesel, you got
Right, right.
all of these like characters that were created and made by the superstars and got over organically, and now you're just gonna put like a new like logo on them. You're gonna stitch. It's like, oh no, this is our property now, and it's just kind of like they try to
Yeah,
do the same with Brian there. And the thing is, I think the wrestling fans, I don't want to say it's like, oh, they got smarter, but it's like you become more aware of these tricks once you've seen
right,
it done 1,000 times, and it's kind of like
right,
seeing the magician how he does his trick, and
right.
you see how the trick's done, and when that happens, you're like, all right, you can't fool me of this, and then the company's still trying to fool you with it, and you're like, I know how the trick's done. It's kind of like the if you ever seen the movie Click, it's kind of like when Henry Winkler's who's Adam Sandler's dad does like the coin behind the ear trick, and
Oh yeah,
And
yeah,
Adam
yeah.
Sandler's like he knows like how the trick's done, but he still like amuses his dad like because
Right,
it's like okay, like this is like it's like I know how the trick's done. Kind of like the similar feeling here, and I think
right.
Daniel Bryan was the first person I think to bridge that gap to the new generation of smart fans.
Oh yeah, 100%. Like, and like like he was over so organically. Like they this because I mean, there's so many times like people they've that got were getting over organically, and they were able to like kind of like squash it out. Like look at Rusev, like how many times like he would, when he was at WWE, like he would be on this rise, and then like they would figure out a way to kind of just like kill that momentum. And I feel like maybe the Wyatt family was that way, and they were like, "There's no like, I think we just added gasoline to the fire by accident instead of putting it out." I feel like that's what happened with this whole thing with Brian and adding him to and that's why they were like, "We got to get him out of the Wyatt family and get him
Yeah,
into a different program," you know.
yeah, and Brian left the Wyatt family on Rusev Day of all days too, so good on him putting it on a national holiday. So it was revealed the next week that Daniel Bryan, his plan was to destroy the Wyatt family from within, and to do that, he would challenge Bray Wyatt at the Royal Rumble, which is I believe, their first strictly one-on-one match. And
Yeah,
this match has been highly regarded as Bray Wyatt's best match and probably his best in-ring performance ever in WWE. Do you agree with that, or
yeah.
where would you rank the Bray Wyatt Daniel Bryan match from the Royal Rumble of 2014?
Like I remember it, like honestly, it's been so long. I should have. It's one of those things I wish I would have just rewatched before this. But it's definitely up. I mean, honestly, let's be real. Brian could wrestle a broom and like make like give us a fucking 5-star match according to
Eh,
Meltzer. But like,
Six in the Tokyo Dome.
um, yeah. So like, and Bray. I mean, Bray was always good. Like Brian's always good about letting people's strengths show in matches, and letting them have their moments, and not just being like getting his shit over.
Hmm.
And like I feel like that's probably why that match is so highly regarded, because it was with Brian, and someone that's so giving, and like as a wrestler, as a performer.
Yeah, and I think there were like a lot of creative spots there too. Like I do remember the Sister Abigail to the outside where it was the guardrail area, the pat like the guard padded guard.
Yeah,
So bam, and then threw him back in the ring, and then another Sister Abigail to finish it. Just like little tweaks like that to put a spin on somebody's like finish, I really do appreciate, because it's almost like it's like, oh wow, they actually got their move off in a different position than they usually do, which uh,
right.
adds to me at least. I'm like, okay, this character is a smart character because they're not doing like the shoulder tackle, whirly bird,
Yeah.
it's like they're not just going through the same
Yeah,
like routine. They're actually being creative with
right.
that, and I think Brian's matches are a lot like that, where
Yeah,
it's like, what if we put this over here? What if I put this over here and make this move look good? And I think this feud definitely increased the visibility of Bray Wyatt, not only as the character but as the in-ring performer, and it was the perfect feud to
right.
parlay him into that John Cena feud, which was going to start this very night at the Royal Rumble. And I want to ask you a question because Daniel Bryan said, "Oh, I'm gonna like break the Wyatt family from within." He didn't really do that. He didn't do that,
No, he did not.
and it's like okay, I understand like the story and the reason for breaking away, but if you wanted to break them from within, you would actually have to create tension between the members, and I don't think he
Right.
really did that at least effectively.
No.
So
No.
how do you?
He just turned. He just got in. Was it waited till an opportunity where he could beat up Bray,
Yeah.
and that's not like turning them in.
Mhm.
Again, like you said, you have to lay seeds and have Harper and Rowan like kind of turn against
Mhm.
Bray, and maybe end up following him for a while instead of Bray.
Mhm.
Kind of become like that de facto leader
Yeah.
of the Wyatts, and then be like tell them to piss off at some point, and then like that to me would be a better like if that's what like you're saying like to break them up from the inside out. Yeah, no, he just like I found a way to get Bray alone and beat the shit out of him.
Yeah.
Is basically is what happened,
Because if you wanted to do,
and then he lost his match against him. So
yeah, and then they were both like, "All right, I guess we're bored of this now," Then they like just
right,
like two ships passing the night. It kind of felt like a
right,
I don't even want to say anticlimactic way to end because the match was so good,
hmm
but the story didn't really make sense at the end.
no, not at the end.
Yeah,
No,
it's almost like we had this told story. Like imagine if you're watching Avengers Endgame, and it's like, and I am Iron Man, snap, and then it cuts to a Looney Tunes cartoon.
right.
It's like
We're like, wait, what just
it's like
happened?
okay, it's like when we going back to that, but it's like it never happens. Like
Right,
okay,
right.
but with Bray and Bryan Danielson at this time, where it really did elevate Bray, and for what we were saying, kind of made Daniel Bryan in this kind of weird holding pattern a little bit.
Yeah.
Um, Overall, what did you think this feud did for both Bray and for Daniel Bryan? Like, if you could give one positive and one negative to each party, what would it be?
So I two in two ways. Like, I don't think it hurt Brian It just I'm trying to think. Like, so let's go to Bray. Bray, I feel like it did. Like you were saying, it showed he got the shine, especially in that last match that him and Daniel Bryan had. But at I feel like that's and it got to show like how you were saying how creative Bray can be in a match. He's not just like the smoke and mirrors guy that's cutting promos. Like he can actually put on a good match and like possibly main event someday on a pay per view or PLE now. And I feel like the negative for Bray was other than that matchmaking, I'm showing that storyline didn't really do much for them. Like because as like a dominant force within the WWE, like as the Wyatt family.
Right.
And then with Brian, like I guess it's the same negative is like it felt like almost like a blow off match in a way where you're like, I guess we got to have a match, and then what's gonna happen to that? Oh well, I'm gonna go do something else. It's like okay, like I mean, but that's what happens a lot in wrestling, right?
Yeah.
Like you have these feuds, and then it's funny because I feel like people get mad if you go back to them like too soon or whatever. And like I will die on the hill of like I want to forever see Hangman and Swerve like forever feud. Like they don't need to have a match like obviously every couple months or whatever. But like Hangman coming back and doing all that stuff like if people have chemistry like those two guys have, like let them like split off, do other stories, and then come back. And to me, it's like one of those two guys. Anytime they see each other, it's on site. Like
Yeah.
I'm all about that. But I feel like they really didn't know how to end the creative with that because they had to get Brian out of that feud and back into like I'm going to main event WrestleMania. Come high or high water
Yeah.
is what came after that. So because he wasn't even in the Rumble.
Right. Yeah.
You know,
They.
like I remember it was like Rey Mysterio was at the end,
Oh, I felt
and people
bad.
booed the shit out of Rey
I
Mysterio,
felt
and you're
really
like,
bad.
why are you booing? Like, it's not his fault.
The
It's
most
like it's not his
the
fault.
most pure
Yeah,
babyface WWE ever
right.
had is getting booed.
Like probably one of the greatest human beings to like be in the ring. Like just like everything I've ever heard about him, people that have met him, people that know, like know him. No, I've know people that have known, him for a while, and just like they talk about him, like just like one of the greatest people ever. And it like I remember Batista on like I forget whose podcast it was. It might have been Lillian Garcia's back. This is years and years ago. I was listening to it, and he was so upset that he's like, I didn't care if people were booing me like when I won.
Mhm.
I was upset that people were booing one of my best friends in the world, Rey Mysterio. It's like he just like it just we know that was like when he came out and people they booed the shit out of him. I think that's when they really knew they're like, okay, we need to really pivot this shit and like
Yeah.
get Bryan into this role of like into Mania. Like
Yeah.
that's so like I don't think there was nothing really hurt either of them, obviously career wise.
Right.
And I thought the Bray stuff with John Cena, it was good, but also like I just remember that kid coming out like singing the whole,
Yeah.
like the whole world in his hands. Like it's just like stuff that, but it's all like a lot of like horror and spooky stuff can also be campy, so you just kind of like have to roll with that. But anyway, I digress. But yeah, I feel like you said, like the negative is like there was no real like end to that feud at all. Like it just ended with the one match, and there was no like, well, what next? Okay, now they're both moving on to something
Yeah,
else.
it's like even if after Bryan won the title, I would expect it's like Bray would like kind of like challenge for that,
Right,
and now
right,
with
right in the
yeah
wings.
with Bray, it's like I get like his character is spooky, so he might not care about the championship, and
Right,
I talked about this with Baltimore with the Fiend, like that character didn't necessarily need the championship right away because it's like they didn't really build him
right.
that championship, and I think that
Hmm.
was like the trouble with Bray, at least in WWE, is that you have this character who's so creatively out there. The
Yeah,
why of why he wants to be a champion is extremely difficult to reason, at least in the normal rules of wrestling. You have to be very creative
right,
of the reason why he wants the championship. Whether it's
right,
like if he's like if he wins the championship, it's like, oh, now WWE like Universe, you are my cult, or even something like that. Just expect. But it's
right.
like again, you can't say cult in a PG product. I don't. I don't. I don't think that. I
Right.
don't think they would
You're
go.
now Rama,
I don't
yeah.
think they would go for that. But this feud overall, I felt like this feud was miscast in that I think it took place in the wrong time frame of the year.
Yep.
Like this felt
Yeah.
like this would have been a really good like right after WrestleMania type of feud. This
Yes.
felt
Yes.
like we would do this after WrestleMania and we build to SummerSlam. But instead, this feud
Yes.
kind of started right when because there's always like a down period after SummerSlam where it's just like
You're
all
right.
right, let's fast forward to the Rumble. All right, good, and
Right.
then we'll go here. So it felt like the story beats like they were doing the story beats correctly. It just wasn't in the right time of frame where people would get excited about it necessarily.
Right. Also, I feel like maybe it would have worked better if, I mean, obviously, if Brian wasn't in this, like, you know, people, the underdog pushing him to become like the superstar that he ended up becoming,
Right.
maybe it would have worked better if he had already been, like, had been that established superstar, had won the title. They didn't have it at the time for whatever, lost it to whomever, but he didn't need a title because he's fucking Daniel Bryan. Like, it doesn't really matter. And I feel like that maybe would have worked better in a sense of storytelling, and like not for work better all around, especially for the Wyatts in the sense of like, okay, now we're going after this guy who's like this big established person, like and maybe they had an idea for something else for the Wyatts when they came back in, but like you said, Cena was out, and like maybe that's somebody that would have worked better with
Mhm.
in that time. But again, would Cena end up joining? the Wyatts now. Like the scene is he's super like he's never like they're never gonna let him like become like part of a heel faction or
we
anything.
saw him with the
So
Nexus and how that turned out.
yeah.
He beat the Nexus so bad they became the Core. All right. So, final thoughts on the Daniel Bryan Bray Wyatt storyline. How would you grade it overall?
C plus maybe. Like if we're doing it that
Yeah.
way, give it doing grade school grade or whatever. Yeah, maybe C plus. Like I don't know. Like we did get that. I mean, as an overall story, looking at back at it, like you're saying now, I think, yeah, it just they didn't know. I don't think they knew what they were doing, and I feel like it was dragged out longer than it was. And then when they realized they had to pull the trigger on it, they pulled it quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Like they had him join, and he wasn't even with them for long enough to like create dissension with them. And maybe they would have done that if they had the time to do it. But yeah, I think yeah. See, like we got that amazing moment. That to me is always an A plus moment,
Mm-hmm.
like A plus plus plus. Like one of the best moments I've ever. It's burned into my brain forever. But yeah, I feel like C plus is like like the way it all unfolded.
Yeah, I would agree with that grade. Maybe I'll give it like a B minus if I was like curving on it because the whole feud kind of felt like
Right,
a Quentin Tarantino movie. Where it's like everything
right,
was kind of out of order. In like some things, and some things
yeah,
were like sped up. Some things were just like kind of like in the wrong order of how they should be. And then before you know it,
right,
it just kind of wrapped up. It just kind of felt
right,
like bro, like the whole like Bruce Willis and Marcellus Wallace deal kind of wrapped up at the end of that movie, and then
yeah.
we're back in the diner,
That's true.
So it's
Right,
like
right,
this whole thing just kind of felt like a fever dream, like we were, we were talking about
yeah,
earlier, what we wanted Brian to see, but it just kind of felt like they hit the notes. I'm just not sure if they played the song that that like correctly that I could like say it's
right.
like, oh, that's a good song.
They just couldn't get the rhythm down.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like a Def Rebel song if we want to go there. I actually think Def Rebel's fine. I don't think they're amazing. I think they're like CFOs.
No.
Uh,
Yeah.
again, it's just one of those things where it's like, yeah, I'll rip them a little bit. But anyway, that concludes this week's episode of Wrestling Retold and Relive with Richie Mars. But before we go, Wrestling and Coffee, please plug everything that you're doing, your TikTok, your comic book TikTok, everything. I want everyone to go and follow him. Follow you.
Well, first off, thank you for having me. And I should have said this at the beginning. You can call me Alex. That's my actual name. But like I just don't have my name in the profile because TikTok is weird, and I had a whole thing. Like so, anyways. I have two TikToks. The first one I created is just Comic Book Alex. It's like a handle I've had for a very long time. That's that's my regular Instagram one too. And just wrestling and coffee on all the socials. I think it's wrestling in the letter N coffee on the Twitter because you can't do that's too many characters for a username
Yeah.
on there. So that's why it's and I'm barely on there because that's a fucking cesspool of humanity. Like anytime I see anybody tweet anything, like yeah, I look out like I make the mistake of looking at who's like commenting on their tweet, and it's just I'm like I don't know why anybody's on that app anymore. It's become so like it's become way worse since it become X, but there's people that use it, and I know people use it, and they still because they built up a following on there, but tell them to find you somewhere else, find you on Threads or something.
Oh,
So,
come on. We got to watch WWE Speed, man. It's only available on X. 12,
oh,
12 p.m.
you mean 3 minute AEW matches? Yes, I said
Oh.
that. I watched the first one, the Ricochet, and I can't remember who. Oh, was it Dragonoff?
It was
And I was like, this is
Dragon Lee,
just
yeah.
yeah, Dragon Lee, and I was just like, uh, this is the very thing people complain about while about watching AEW.
Yeah.
Like, I'm like watching the match. I'm like, this is the very thing. All these they're gonna be like, oh my god, look how fucking fantastic Ricochet is, and blah 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 blah. I'm like, yeah, he would be doing that same thing over in AEW, but I digress. Like, I'm just saying, like, And I'm not saying one's better than the other.
Mhm.
I'm not saying that at all. All I'm saying is, you know, just recognize, you know, that sometimes people are doing things, and again, all wrestling, I love it all.
Mhm.
I just, it's good or bad. At the end of the day, it's still wrestling.
Yeah, I 100% agree, and I also have the same heat with X or Twitter because I try to put at retold Richie Mars, and I can't fit the Mars in there, so now it's at retold Richie. So I'm
Right
just like, oh, so that's gonna segue me into plugging my stuff. So
there, you
at
go.
retold Richie Mars on the Instagram and the TikTok, at retold Richie on the X or Twitter. I don't use X or Twitter because sometimes I forget I have it, and people are like, "Oh, it's a cesspool now." I'm just like, "Oh, it's always been a cesspool."
Yep,
It's
it's
just
just got. I feel like it's just gotten
yeah,
worse.
but now you can watch full length movies on there apparently. But
Very nice.
this is Wrestling Retold and Relive with Richie Mars. Again, you could listen to us every Tuesday on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. New videos every day on the TikTok, Instagram. I will see you guys later. TTFN, Tata for now, and I will see you next time.
Bye, everybody.